Evening, and thank you, those of you who actually decided to stay on for poetry. It's a heroic act in many ways, just as heroic as writing poetry, for which one is constantly seeking readers and listeners. But thanks, those of you who decided to stay. Love Without a Story is a book that comes after 5 years after my last book of poems. And as I often say, it's a book that's hopefully not about the cliches of love, but the oddness of it. The fact that one can sometimes find a sense of kinship with people one least expects to feel that sense of kinship with. Sometimes across political boundaries, ideological, philosophical, religious boundaries, across sacred, secular divides as well. So this is about the unexpectedness of love. The strange thing about love is that it melts you into an amateur, never again a professional, even on the subject of yourself. The strange thing about love is that you disagree wildly, and then figure it's wiser to dance. The strange thing about love is that it evicts you from the land of echoes that you thought was home and leads you to friends sitting under the stars in ancient bewilderment. I don't know how many of you have ever felt this, but for me, growing up, it often felt like parents were just landscape. They were the foundation beneath your feet, sometimes a wobbly foundation, but they were there. They were the backdrop to one's life. They were happening somewhere behind, while we were very clearly the protagonists of our own lives. And there came a point in my life, and maybe some of you will recognize this from your own. There came a point in my life, very early, suddenly, when I turned and looked and realized that my mother was a person. So this is documenting that moment, when landscape becomes woman. I was 8 when I looked through a keyhole and saw my mother in the drawing room in her hibiscus silk sari, her fingers slender around a glass of iced cola. And I grew suddenly shy for not having seen her before. I knew her well, of course. Serene undulation of blue malmal, wrist serrated by thin gold bangle, the gentle convexity of mole on upper right arm, and her high arched feet, better than I knew myself. And I knew her voice, like running water, ice cubes in cola. But through the keyhole at the grown-up party, she was no longer geography. She seemed to know just how to incline her neck, just when to sip her swirly drink, and she understood the language of lacquered nails and baritone voices and words like emergency. I could have watched her all night. And that's how I discovered that keyholes always reveal more than doorways. That a chink in the wall is all you need to tumble into a parallel universe. That mothers are women. Some years ago, a newspaper, and I think it was DNA, decided to ask some poets, a few of us, to write a poem based on a word that was selected by a reader for us. And it was to be a word in an Indian language other than English. So this idea appealed hugely because poets are very seldom commissioned to do anything. So when they are, you suddenly feel very important and happy. And so I agreed until I discovered the word. The word was mitti. And that filled me with this kind of deep despair because I thought I was being expected to write motherland poem, a kind of breast-beating, chest-thumping, flag-waving motherland poem, and I wasn't sure I wanted to do that. But I decided to stay with the word and it gradually made its way into some muddy part of myself. I'm very glad I decided to stay with mitti and give it a chance. Mitti. As a child, I ate mud. It tasted of grit and peat and wild churning and something else that I could never quite find a name for. Later, I became a moon gazer, always squinting through windows, believing freedom was aerial, until I figured that the moon was a likely mud gazer, longing for the thick sludge of gravity, the promiscuous thrill of touch, the license to break, make, remake. And so I uncovered the old role of poets, to be messengers between moon and mud. And I began to uncover the many languages of earth that have nothing to do with nations and atlases, and everything to do with the ways of earwigs, the pilgrim trail of roots, the great longing of life to hold and be held, and the irrepressible human love of naming. Ooze, mire, manure, humus, dirt, silt, mold, loam, soil, slush, clay, shit, mann, matope, baro, tinen, ni, luto, fango, all have their place, I found, in the democracy of tongues. None superior, none untranslatable. All reminders of the anthem of muck of which we are made. Except when June clouds capsize over an Arabian sea and a sleeping city awakens to an ache so singular that for just a moment it could have no name, other than that where sound meets scent and a slop of matter meets a slick lunatic wetness, mitti. Just that. Nothing else will do. There are different definitions of love in this book. And before I conclude with the last couple of poems, I just want to read a poem about one particular journey that I undertook. There are many journeys in this book and conversations that happen on that journey. There's a journey to La Verna, the Tuscany, the monastery in Tuscany associated with St. Francis of Assisi. There is a journey to that enigmatic granite mountain in the Tibetan Himalayas, Kailash. And there are different definitions of love along the way. The monk. It's interesting to read this poem for me here because we are at a festival of letters. And to think of those who choose to lead their lives far away from the world of words, consciously, is just interesting to contemplate. And poetry in some ways is just an invitation to think of those as well. The monk. There are monks here and mystics and lovers and parents and friends, but this is the monk. The monk who's been in silence 16 years, writes me a note at a yak tea stall, skirted by ragged prayer flags in a grey hiccuping wind on the road to Kailash. His face is scarp and fissure and gleaming teeth. He spends each day cleaning his shrine. It's worth it, he laughs. I clean the shrine, it cleans me. He was a spare parts dealer in a time he barely remembers, before he was tripped up by something that felt like a granite mountain in reverse, the deepest pothole he's ever known, too deep to be called love. That turned him into a spare part himself, utterly dispensable, wildly unemployed. And if there is another lifetime, this is what I'd ask for, he says. And now he doesn't laugh. Same silence, same cleaning. And since it's always difficult to stand on stage and read one's poems, it's nice to be able to invite company on stage. Today, I happened to meet a very old friend whom I hadn't met since my college years, a writer in her own right, the sports writer Sharda Ugra. And I'd like to invite her on stage to read an anthem of a poem along with me. 3 cheers for my old college buddy. What page is it? 67? All right, so this is the kind of poem that I haven't usually read from this book, but it's an anthem, and it's a fun anthem. It's an anthem to women. It's addressed to all women over 50, essentially. And it's intended to be for those women who are celebrated in this book, because one of the protagonists of this book is Avayar, the ancient woman of Tamil literature. She's a wanderer, a mendicant, a vagabond, a poet, and she's also a crone. She's a woman who voluntarily chooses old age. And that character interested me more and more, and there's a whole cycle of poems to her. But because there isn't time to read those, we're going to read you another poem for older women. This is for all those women who've seen through cultural expectation, all those women whose lives are no longer tyrannized by biological clocks, all those women who, like Avayar, choose to lead lives that allows them to walk, as I say in the poem, unhurried, forever out of step, always on time. Song for catabolic women. Catabolic here meaning when the metabolic activity starts breaking down, basically. Song for catabolic women. We are bound for the ocean and a largesse of sky. We are not looking for the truth or living a lie. We're coming apart. We're going downhill. The fury is almost done. We've had our fill. We're passionate, ironic, angelic, demonic, wildly Indian, anti-national, clairvoyant, rational. We're not trying to make our peace, not itching for a fight. We don't need your shade, and we don't need your light. We know charisma isn't contagious, and most rules are egregious. We are catabolic women.
We've known the refuge of human arms, the comfort of bathroom floors. We've stormed out of rooms and thrown open doors. We've figured the tricks to turn rage into celebration. We know the oldest god dances at every cremation. We've kissed in the rose garden, between the bells of the ball, hidden under bed covers, and we've stood tall. We're not interested in camouflage or self-revelation, not looking for a bargain or an invitation. We're capable of stillness, even as we gallivant, capable of wisdom, even as we rant. Look into our eyes. You'll see we're almost through. We can be kind, but we're really not thinking of you. We don't remember names, and we don't do Sudoku. We're losing EQ and IQ, forgetting to say please and thank you. We're catabolic women.
Thank you. There's more to it, but we're going to end there. Thank you all for being here, and we hope at some point that you will think of picking up your copy of Love Without a Story. Thank you so very much.